Good morning and welcome to Step by Step Listeners page. It's What's Working Wednesday. I'm Cheryl Andrews and the subject today is why people won't listen to your story. So I want to first of all just talk about the pain that comes when we're talking and we're telling our version of events and we don't end up feeling heard and understood, because it's really distressing. And I want to just tell you a few stories about that because I want you to know it's not just you. And then I want to share with you 3 reasons why that happens. And then I want to leave you with a personal development task, something you can do, you can proactively do to practice getting yourself heard and understood, because that's when the magic happens. When you start to know that it's not down to you have to train them to listen differently, but you can train yourself to communicate it in a way that makes it possible for them to listen, then it puts things back in your control. So the pain of not being heard. I don't know if you can relate to this, but you start speaking and you're sharing your version of events. That's what I mean by your story. You're sharing what's happening for you, and somebody talks over you, or they interrupt you and tell you what you should be doing, and it can feel like they have just silenced you. It's like what you've got to say doesn't matter, and that happens for lots of different reasons. But I want to talk for the moment as to how that leaves you feeling. You know, what happens to your clarity of your own thinking? What happens to your confidence in your own belief system and your validation of who you are and your version of events? Because what I see is when people are shut down and they're not heard and they don't get that story out, and it doesn't get heard and responded to in a affirming way, then that can be the deterioration of confidence in an individual, which then means they lose confidence in their decisions, they stop taking action, and before you know it, they're in overwhelm and they're not doing more of what they love, and they're definitely consumed by the critic that says they can't. And I don't want that for you. I want you to have the tools, the resources, the processes to set yourself up for success. So the number one reason why, and I've written it down to keep on track today, people don't listen, is that you don't tell them why they should before you start talking. So one of the things that often happens is we get straight into story mode. We're doing verbal diarrhea, we're downloading, blah, 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 and we haven't listened to ourselves first and thought about, why are we telling this story? Why does it matter? And I call this process of chatting with purpose. So if you start talking and they override you, just check in, and were you clear in your own mind why you were telling the story? You know, what's in it for them is a good way of looking at it. And it might be, definitely with partners when I do this work, is to actually say, well, actually, I know this story isn't of interest to you. I know it doesn't make any difference to your map of the world, but actually, if you could listen to it, and it will make me feel better. But please bear in mind, when you ask someone to listen to you with nothing to guide their attention, so are they listening to give you a solution? Are they listening to just let you download so you can hear yourself thinking? Are they listening because you want them to ask questions? Are they listening because you want them to give you some feedback or for them to notice anything? If they don't know what kind of listening they're doing, then I can almost guarantee the minute you start talking, they'll get it wrong. And then you end up in a catch-22 where they feel like there's nothing they can do right. You feel that nobody's listening. So before you start talking and telling your story, it's thinking about what's in it for them, what do they need to know, and what kind of listening do you need from them? And if you don't know anything about that, do check out the 7 kinds of listening, either in the blog or in the book, because sometimes we are just downloading and there's something really great just like telling your story. A couple of times this week I've had a few things going on and I've been a bit upset about some stuff, and I've just phoned friends and said, look, I just need to talk about how I'm feeling. I don't really need you to make it better. In fact, that probably would make it worse. I just want to acknowledge that I was scared, that I was upset about something, and I know that in sharing that with you and you honouring it, I will let go of it and it will really help me. So they now know anything other than hear it without judgment. And it makes it easier. So that's why they're listening, to make me feel better. They're not listening so that they can learn something or do anything with the information. I'm not asking them to listen to the story. So you have to make it relative, or to them. And it might be about you, but if you're not doing that consciously, then they won't know that. So number reason you don't tell them why you want them to listen or how you want them to listen. Second reason, you don't check that they're actually available to listen. If you think about it yourself right now, and you're out there listening to friends and family, just notice how long you can listen for before your attention starts wandering. How often, just time, we do an exercise in the training program to listen for 2 minutes. But if you just think about, if you were listening to somebody and just listening to the words they're using, listening to the tone and the pace, listening to the language, and you're just literally observing them in the moment without thinking about what's going on in your world, without thinking about how this relates to you or why you do it. So not going off into your own story, not interrupting and go, oh, I remember that when that happened to me. When you're purely listening and holding that space for another human being, just notice how long you can do that for somebody else. Because what can happen is we expect people to listen to us for far longer than we could even listen to anybody else. So we've got kind of a bit of a double standard. We're expecting somebody to do something that we can't do. And what I've learned over this journey with the listening skills is that whilst it is a difficult skill to develop, particularly if we've got lots going on in our own mind, it's really, really valuable. And the more I practice it and the more I mess it up, particularly in my personal relationships, in my business relationships, I know I'm paid. So kind of the light goes on and I go, it's like, okay, for 90 minutes, I'm listening. And I'm listening and feeding back and reflecting. Even when I'm talking, it's about the context and the language of the other person. It's not about what's going on in my mind or what I need or what I want. And so and then the switch goes because the session finishes. When I'm in everyday conversation with people, I mess up on a regular basis because it's a constant calibration. But the difference is I'm not annoyed with people. I'm not cross with them when they don't listen to me, because I get that maybe they had stuff going on in their own head before I even started talking. So I didn't check that, are they available to listen? One of the things that I do with Mark, I just say, is that I just need to talk for a minute. Now, many, many, many partners, when you say I just need to talk, they immediately default that they think they've done something wrong. So I again say why I want to talk. So it's, you haven't done anything wrong, I just need to do this, X, Y, and Z. And then I say, I need to talk for about 10 minutes. Now, if I say I'm going to talk for any longer than that, Mark's ability to stay with me and not give me his opinion, not try and help me or give me a solution, is challenging. So we have an alarm where I set it for 10 minutes and I agree that I will only talk for 10 minutes, because I know the energy it takes for an individual to listen to somebody else and hold back their instinctive responses. So people that are trained as coaches, I can only do about 3 90-minute sessions in a day when I'm really, really focusing with somebody. I need a break from that. And when I've done like the 5-day retreats, when I come home in the evening, that first night back, I'm spent. I've got no capacity to listen to anybody else. All I want to do is just let everything settle and then allow it all to process, so I can actually be available to my family and friends again and my future clients. So the second reason then for not being listened to is because you haven't checked that they're available. Maybe they've been listening to loads of people recently. Maybe they've had to be the one that's got their head full of stuff. And right now, they need either, if they're more introverted, they need some time to process. They just need to let that information settle. Or maybe if they're an external process, they're the one that needs to talk. And so you've come together and you're both in, I need to express myself. And so it's finding out if they're available before you start. Then you can negotiate it. And what works for Mark and I as an alarm is because I can talk about stuff for ages. And actually, it's really beneficial for me to stop myself and just breathe. And it's really beneficial for Mark to know when I'm going to stop talking, because it takes a lot of attention for him to concentrate. And it's not a criticism of him. For human beings as a whole, it is difficult to really, really listen. Now, there are lots of people out there I know who stay quiet, but I know that they're not always listening. They're quiet and they're allowing me to talk, but they're actually off in their own little world, and they're kind of listening to bits I'm saying, but that's different to someone who's really, really listening to what you've got to say. So the third reason is because you're repeating an old story. Now, the brain is hardwired to look for patterns so that it can predict. So when Angela turns up on the video, which, hi, good morning, Angela, my brain will know that this is the energy of somebody who wants good for me, that they want to inspire me, they want to encourage me. Whereas there may be other people that may turn up in my world, and I think, oh, as soon as they turn up, they're going to challenge me and ask me questions, and they can ask me questions I haven't even thought about. And it's like, and I'm usually that person for people, actually. Quite often people see me, if they're not in the mood for questions, they kind of give me a wide berth. Because who I am in this world is someone that will either stand there and tell a story and get very excited about something, or I'll be going, oh, how'd you do that? And I want a really, really, really detective hat comes out. So I'm like a cheerleader, excited, bubbly person with pom-poms, cheering, leading other people. Or I've got my detective hat and my magnifying glass going, ooh, how does that work? And if someone's not ready to be asked those questions, I see them in a networking event and kind of steer clear of me. But when they want the cheerleader, they want that thing, people magnetize, they're attracted to me. But the point behind the story is that your brain and my brain, everybody's brain, is spotting patterns, and so it will see a certain behavior, it will see a certain person, and it will predict what's going to happen next. Good example was at Silverstone. One of the reasons I was upset this week and I was having to deal with my emotions is that I had an experience of being in a football crowd that when the team lost, that the emotion changed really drastically. I go to F1 and I love it because of the mindset, the mentality, the attitude. You can have Red Bull fans and Mercedes fans and Williams fans all in the same row, and their team can win or lose, and nobody gets aggressive with each other. It's just like, oh, the mindset, the attitude. But when you get into a football crowd when their team doesn't win, the energy is completely different. And what was happening for me, I was in this big crowd and I'd see two people and they'd look like, I couldn't hear what they were saying. They were just like, and then they'd stop and go. So what I realized is they were probably role playing or repeating a story about someone who got angry, or they just looked animated. But my brain was going, right, we've got a football thing, England's playing, if they lose and he kicks off, this is going to be a big fight. And so my brain was predicting what was going to happen. And that is what our brain does. It is looking for patterns and connections and repetition because it's trying to save energy. The trouble with that system is it often is wrong. There was no problems at all. I saw no violence whatsoever at the F1. And yet my anxiety, the story that I told myself, was to do with a past experience and a prediction of it. So when you're telling stories to yourself or others, if there is stuff you are repeating, that might be the language, then what happens is they already decide that they know what's coming. So they stop listening. So there's a couple of things you can do. Is remember that people will listen to stories that are changing. They'll listen if they understand why they've got to listen. They'll understand if they'll be able to listen if it's a good time for them to listen. They physically have the space in their head and their mind to listen. And they'll stay listening to your story as long as there's change in it. Now, I see relationships and friendships and things coming to a halt because people have got into a really difficult place in their life, something's really awful that's happening to them, and they go to their friend and they tell the story about their husband or their children or their job or their boss or whatever, and when they meet them for coffee again the next time, they've got the same story to tell, so they tell the story again. And we might go on 2 or 3 times, and our friends can listen to those stories for a number of times, some more patient than others. But what tends to happen, which is really sad, is we start avoiding people. Either we avoid them because we can't stand listening to the story, and we may not do it consciously, but we'll suddenly be very busy and we won't book appointments with them. We won't follow up because we think, oh, they're just going to tell that same story again. Now, you may not do it consciously, but I can assure you it does happen. Or you're the person, these are the clients I tend to work with, where you've run out of people to tell the story to because you know you're repeating it. And you're then seeing a rolling of the eyes and you're thinking they're bored with it, they're frustrated, they don't like it. That's also an assumption. That's a pattern in the story you're telling yourself about their response because you probably haven't asked them. But generally, our friends, if they're listening to us and we're in pain, it's uncomfortable for them to do so. They have to just listen, and that takes energy to turn off their emotions, to turn off their feelings, and just hold that space and be there for you. So it's recognizing that when they're doing that, imagine that you've asked them to hold a big rock above their head, right? And all the time you're talking about pain, they can do it for a little while, and then it gets heavier, and it gets heavier, and it gets heavier, and it gets more painful. And what they want is for the pain to stop. Now, they may verbalize it in terms of their own pain. It might feel like it's all about them and they're being selfish. But but actually it's listening to your pain that's causing the pain, that you end up both being stuck in the story. They don't know how to help you because they try and say something that doesn't make you feel heard. They try not saying anything, and then you say you're not really listening because you're not interested, and you get stuck in the story. So the personal development task I want you to think about this week is, first of all, really listening to yourself and other people for 2 minutes or more. And even if it sounds like you're telling the same story, or they sound like they're telling the same story, I want you to listen for the change. Now, it might be a change that they're getting angrier or sadder. It might be change that it's getting better or improving. But if you train your attention so that when you're listening, if you hear your critics say, oh, it's the same story, it's the same place, they're going over and over again and nothing's changed, then I want you to tune in and really, really listen for the change. Because when we can spot the change, that's when stories remain interesting for the human brain. It's because patterns become boring and we switch off and they listen to them. But change, we do tune into. And if when you're telling your story, so when I was telling my friends the story again about Silverstone, I told 3 people and I've sorted it now. The energy that was inside me, the fear that was going on, it's all gone. But as I was telling them, I would say to them, look, you're the second person I have to talk to about this. But what I'm noticing is already as I tell it the second time, I'm starting to feel better. I'm starting to feel a bit more acknowledged. I'm starting to realise why I'm so scared. And so by telling them, I told them about the thing and what happened and the emotion that came up. But then the story changed because I'm going to the next chapter of the story, and I'm saying about progression, what I'm learning from it. And actually, the latest story isn't all about the fear and I didn't like it. I have said that I would think twice about going when the World Cup was on again. We have booked for next year. So the lessons I've learned is that I will think twice. I'm not saying I won't go, but I would think twice about going when the World Cup was on. But actually, the latest thing is actually what I'm remembering is nothing happened. So instead of hooking into a story of what could have happened based on my old story and my old evidence, my story is changing. So as I tell people that story, it's the same story, but it's the next episode. And it's really easy when we're telling a story to people that we stay in a very small chunk of it and we don't write the next chapter. And if you are your life right now feels like you're writing the same problem over and over again, just remember your life is your choice and that you can choose to write a different chapter. You are in control of your life. So if you listen to your story and your story is driving around the bend, then decide what you'd like to have happen in the next chapter. Listen to yourself and think about if the next chapter of your life was just the way you'd like it to be. And it could start right now, in this second. That chapter could start right now. It doesn't have to be something you plan forever and ages. You could choose to focus on telling stories about things that change. You could choose to tell stories about things that are improving. You could choose to tell stories about how grateful you are that people have listened to you for the amount of time they did, rather than telling them off for not listening long enough. It is your choice, and that's the bit where you're going to get improvements. So personal development task is to listen for 2 minutes longer to yourself or other people and purposely listen to change. Listen if their energy goes up or down, if they go faster or slower. Listen to see if any of the words change. Say maybe they've gone from saying, I'm always useless at this to sometimes I'm useless at this. Notice if they go from blaming you to blaming them. Notice if they start to talk about what they want rather than what they don't want. Notice if they've gone from talking about what they want to what they don't want. Any change will keep your brain highly interested and it will be easier for you to stay engaged with it. And if you are that person who is really struggling right now and you feel completely isolated, you feel like you're on your own, that nobody gets you, that you haven't been heard for ages, and that you want your story to change, and you keep telling it, and the feedback you're getting currently right now is just making you shut down and shut down and shut down to the point where you think there is no point speaking because it's just getting worse, then please reach out for professional help. If it's not me, talk to somebody who is trained to listen. It is a skill. It is something that takes a lot of energy. It's just like doing a workout. I mentally have to work quite hard to listen to people who are telling sad stories or stories that push my buttons. That's a skill that I've trained in doing. But in doing so, that allows people to really hear their own story, and it gives them the opportunity to decide what they want the next chapter to be like. but also to look back over and edit the past stories to make sure that they've got the lessons. Because what I do find when people are telling their stories is that when I pay attention to the change, when I pay attention to repetition and patterns, and I repeat it back to them for them to hear it, the most heartbreaking thing is, and maybe the reason we sometimes don't listen to our own stories as well as we expect other people to listen to ours, is that we often find that we're making the same mistakes over and over again. But that'll be for another video, because I've got some other stuff about reflecting that I want to talk to you about over the next couple of weeks in videos. So I'd love to hear how you get on with listening for longer. And don't forget to get in touch with me if you're ready for change and you want to book one of my complimentary clarity sessions. Just put in the bottom, I'm ready for a new story. And I'd love to listen to you and help you to get that clarity and confidence to communicate what it is you want. Lots of love, everybody. Have a fantastic week. Speak to you soon. Thanks for joining me, Angela.